these tests has seemed beneficial to you as a parent.
To our webinar. Sorry about that. And as folks are coming in, thank you again for logging in, for taking time in the middle of your day to join us for an incredibly important topic at an incredibly important time. My name is Curtis Valentine. I'm the co-director of the Reinventing America Schools project here in Washington, D.C. Today's event is co-sponsored by the 74. The Reinventing America Schools project is housed at the Progressive Policy Institute and promotes a model of schools we call 21st century school systems, or systems that provide parents more choice and give schools more autonomy in return for more accountability. Our research shows that public school systems that do this produce the most rapid improvement in student performance. Today's webinar will highlight the power of parents to influence local, state, and federal elections, but most importantly, what they should be thinking about before voting. Before we introduce our panelists, I want to survey the audience to find out who's behind sort of the wall and who's watching us today. It will help our panelists as they're sort of answering questions and give you an impression of who else is in the room. If you're like me, identify with at least 2 or 3 of these categories. And so the question is, which group do you most identify with? As a parent, as an educator, as a funder, a journalist, an advocate, or a policymaker. So you can click one, and then we'll share the results with our speakers. But without further ado, I want to introduce, I'll give my panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves, where they are and what they do, and then we'll get started. We'll start as far north as we can go, up in Boston, with Carrie Rodriguez.
Hi there, I'm Carrie. I'm Matthew, Miles, and David's mom. I'm the president of the National Parents Union, as well as an NPU Action Fund. I'm up here just outside of Boston in Woburn, Mass, and very excited to be with you.
Thank you for joining us, Carrie. Joe Napolitano.
Hi, yes, I'm Joe Napolitano, a senior reporter from the 74 and the mom of 2 cats. And I care deeply, deeply, deeply about education and its absolutely transformative nature for the poorest kids in the country and in the world, which I was once one.
Thank you for joining us again, Joe. Jason.
Hey, this is Jason Estevez. I am Jaden and Zoe's dad and Ariel's husband. And I am a state senator here in Atlanta, Georgia, representing parts of Northwest and Southwest Atlanta. I am also a former public school teacher, taught middle school social studies in Houston, Texas, and I was on the school board for Atlanta Public Schools, and including not a short stint, a stint as chair of the school board during the COVID pandemic years. So that accounts for some of the thinning hairline that I have as a result.
No, thank you, Jason. You and I were both on the school board, so I think we've got the same barber with time. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention I am Curtis and Ivy's dad, and so I think it's incredibly important that we bring those folks into the room. And so let's get started. While thousands of votes have already been cast, we are less than a week away from perhaps the most consequential election in our lifetime. We understand that parents, particularly working class parents, have been targeted by both political parties during this election season. Positions on key issues like reproductive rights, the cost of childcare, and gun safety in schools will determine how voters, particularly parents, make the decision in the voting booth next Tuesday. Carrie, I want to start with you, particularly because your organization has done a tremendous amount of research over time, talking to parents, polling parents about what matters to them. And so your organization recently partnered with Echelon Insights to conduct a poll of parents. What did you discover about how important the topic of education in schools are to them as voters, but also like what education policies specifically most interest them as voters?
So thank you so much for the question. And this is actually our 40th national poll. We've been doing this for quite some time, and we started doing it because, as parents and families across the country, we got really frustrated by the idea that, people were speaking for us and deciding what our priorities were and what we cared about. And oftentimes you'd listen to these folks talk and they were getting it wrong. So we decided we wanted to be able to quantify that. It was especially helpful in the past several years where there were some pretty powerful forces and campaigns that had put themselves together saying that they spoke on behalf of us. So being able to quantify, well, how many parents do you actually speak on behalf of was really helpful so that we could have a more thoughtful and data-driven conversation. So that's what we aim to do here. We do this every single year in October. So we can kind of have that baseline of information. What kind of election is this going to be? And as you said, parents are really struggling with a whole host of issues right now. And number one with a bullet is the economy. What we can see from our polling again this year is that it's really going to come down to the closing argument around the economy in terms of what's really driving parents and families to the polls. It's neck and neck. According to our polling, it's really within the margin of error. It's 47-48. With only about 4% of American families undecided. So really going in there, deciding, who's making that best closing argument is important. When it comes to education, I'm sad to report that only 10% of American families would call that their number one issue. I do think that there are ways that we who care deeply about education and its transformational power for our children and in our communities, how we can do a better job of talking about education so that it provides the necessary context so it rises in terms of priority. We have a lot of work to do there. But when we talk to American families overall in terms of what they want to hear from candidates around education, we do have some really great data there. And number one, their top priority when it comes to education and what they want to see in terms of policy change would be how to protect schools from violence. That continues to be a top issue. We're talking gun violence. We're also talking about bullying and the overall conditions. Are our kids safe in classrooms? Are they safe spaces to learn about, celebrate, and express their identities? So overall school safety and whether or not our kids are okay is number one. And that is bipartisan. 70% of Republicans saying that is their top issue, 79% of Democrats saying that that's number one. But also immediately behind, how to ensure schools have well-trained teachers. They're very concerned about teacher quality and whether or not the educators in the classroom are highly qualified. Number three being how schools should prepare students for future jobs. You will hear us at the National Parents Union saying so often, education for parents, it's a different lens. It's not about inputs, it's about outcomes. And we're not here just to get our kids to that piece of paper at the end of the stage. We're talking about how do we get our kids lined up so that they can access economic opportunity and economic mobility. So it's education and context. So what they really want to see is how we are creating these pathways and that there are multiple pathways for different kinds of kids to get to those future jobs and the jobs and economy of the future. Next, very much of interest and something that we have been talking a lot to the Biden administration, the Domestic Policy Council, to the US Department of Education, and really making clear is that parents are very concerned about ensuring that all kids have access to high quality schools, regardless of their family's income level or where they live. Public school choice, public school options, universal enrollment. Parents just don't understand why there can be a great school that would be a great fit for their kid and probably has some open seats, but they can't get their kid in there. And it's deeply frustrating and really upsetting. So understanding that as a priority and cracking that nut is something they want to be a top priority. And then rounding off the top five, how schools should address students' mental health needs. Because our kids, they need more help, they need more support. These issues you will see are some of the core reasons that we struggle with things like chronic absenteeism. When we have the conversation even around cell phones and parents want kids to have cell phones and they're kind of interconnected in that we are their number one mental health support. We're deeply concerned about them. They're in a mental health crisis right now, as identified by the Surgeon General of the United States, and maintaining that connection is really important. So listening to parents around these policy issues and solving for them actually might help us solve some of the major issues that we're seeing pop up that are causing so much controversy now in the education conversation.
Jason, I mean, you're on the ground. I mean, you're an elected official. I'm sure you're out there campaigning for friends and colleagues. Did anything Carrie said surprise you, or anything that jumps out at you from what you're hearing from the parents that she's polled?
No, it's not surprising at all. And when we talk to voters on the ground, um, especially parents, education is lower on the issue list, simply because, and I want to make sure we don't misinterpret why it's lower on the list. It is lower on the list, sixth, seventh place. But that's because there are so many other issues, one, that need to be addressed that impact what's happening in our classrooms. But two, there's this notion that federal politics, state politics, when they get involved in schools, they make it worse. So there's this notion that we just want you to leave us alone and just give us the support we need. So I think that because of the national discourse in this presidential year, education ranks lower because there's this fear, especially here in Georgia, that if you get the state government, if you get some of these elected officials and candidates talking about our schools, we'll be going in the opposite direction of the place where Carrie talked about that parents who were surveyed want to go. So there's that fear in that of going backwards. But I also think that if you drill deeper and talk to parents about the issues that are impacting them and their child's education, it's right in line with what Carrie talked about. And I think that to the extent that education is talked about with this election year, it's talked about in ways about how the federal government and the state government can support schools and what's happening in our schools versus regulating and trying to dictate what's happening in schools. It's more about how the federal government can add to it. So school safety is a perfect example of it. Mental health, teacher training. In Georgia, there's a literacy crisis. About 60% of our third graders are not reading on grade level. And that's a statewide issue. It's just not focused on urban areas. So there are a lot of issues where parents feel like support is needed. But I do think there's this concern that there are politicians out there that have tried to do too much to interfere and to increase the challenges around education versus tearing those barriers down.
Joe, I mean, you've been writing about education and have, worked at the states on different topics. The top 3 or 4 issues that parents do care about, there is still a sort of a theme of education in them, whether it be the economy, whether it be housing, whether it be other things that we talk about. Do we have a communication problem when it comes to trying to highlight education and its importance to elections? I mean, have you seen examples of where when you're reporting about a topic that you also talk about how education is impacting the environment, public safety, housing, the economy, the ability to grow into the middle class? Where are we getting it wrong?
Ooh, so I mean, I guess, it's interesting because I would definitely say, sadly, for someone like me, education is not a major talking point of both presidential candidates. And I think to me, education is the most important topic in the world. Literally, if there was a better education on so many topics, whether it's immigration or pandemic response, or if we were better educated in statistics, if we were better educated understanding how our labor market works, it would take the fear out of so many issues that are really dividing Americans if they simply knew more about all of these things. But I just want to note that both presidential candidates have touched on certain issues, even though it's not their kind of main focus. Things like whether or not to abolish the Federal Department of Education, their feelings on school choice, loan forgiveness, early childhood education. And there's a couple of elections. In Indiana, you've got U.S. Senator Mike Braun facing off with former state education chief Jennifer McCormick, where education has been raised as an issue there because of her vast experience in education. Braun wants to greatly expand vouchers and what he calls parents' rights, especially in terms of parents knowing whether or not their child wants to use different pronouns in school. He's really kind of focused on that. And McCormick wants to expand affordable childcare, fight for what she believes is excessive state testing, and also she wants an equitable school funding formula. Education is also an issue in North Carolina, though we know how that race is going and all the controversy that's been there. But Mark Robinson has dubbed education wicked and says he wants to get rid of the indoctrination of children and this and that, is interested in corporal punishment. And no matter who wins that race, said anything can happen. The person who does take that seat has a powerful role. The governor will appoint a handful of folks for 8-year terms to the State Board of Education. And of course, while education isn't the biggest focus of the presidential candidates, we should note that the National Education Association has raised nearly $27 million to fund campaigns around the nation, with many millions going to Harris. I would say, in terms of things getting lost, that's a really interesting and tough question. I would say that, there are a lot of races that we should be watching for. Voters in Montana, North Carolina, North Dakota, Washington State will choose state superintendents this upcoming election, which seems to me to be a pretty powerful role. And those folks can do really interesting and impactful things. We've got Oklahoma State Superintendent Ryan Waters, who mandated that Bibles be added to curriculum in one way or another, recently saying just a couple days ago he has sent Vice President Harris a $475 million bill because the state has paid that much, I guess, to educate quote unquote illegal immigrants since 2021. So these folks are really consequential in these races. And, some people would argue that local politics is the most impactful. We should be most concerned with our local school boards, our state superintendents of education. And having written about education for about 25 years, I would say those folks have done some really powerful stuff. I was reading, and please understand, I've taken this from the 74, from EdSource, from all kinds of education news sites, and kind of scouring a little bit this morning. But I had read that there are an estimated 12,000 school board races on the ballot this year, ranging from massive urban districts like Los Angeles to little itty bitty tiny communities that will be changed by just a handful of votes. And think about that. That's probably, one of the most impactful organization on your child's life is the school board. We know so much about our presidential election. We're hanging on every word. And of course, that's really critical. But when it comes to things like, students' rights or free speech, or whether or not we trust teachers in the classroom to teach about the most sensitive topics in a thoughtful, caring way that shares real, true information with our children to make them better human beings and better to be able to be civically engaged, those are decisions made less than a mile from our home. So, I agree that there is some kind of disconnect about what parents care about most and what's happening politically. And, the answer to that, which is the hardest to do, is to become involved, be more civically involved, make sure you get out to vote for these races, make sure you speak up at your school board meetings. But I think we'll get to that next question later.
No, thank you so much. And we were joined by Dr. Fuller. Thank you so much for joining us, brother. You were doing the good deed of taking students to vote today. So those of you, and so appreciate you, understanding the importance of sharing that experience with those students at the school named in your honor. So we definitely recognize that. Carrie did a great job of starting us off with some results of a poll that our organization put together, which highlighted that for many parents, education is not a super top priority, but when it comes to education, issues around public safety, around safety in schools, around teacher quality, around access to quality schools, and mental health issues, among others, are top priorities. I guess my question to you, Doc, is over the time that you've been in this work in education, where have you seen the changes in how parents look at education over time? And what are you hearing on the ground in Milwaukee about the issues in education that parents most care about and they're thinking about when they're going to vote?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I really apologize, but it was for a good reason. So we had to stand in line for an hour. And so our goal has been to get all of our 18-year-olds both registered and voted. And so we're up to 12 of them. And I got 6 of them that I got to catch because of all the hoops that people have to go through. We got to get an ID, you got to go to DMV, all the stuff you all know. But a good, I really appreciate being on. Here's how I would respond to that. To be very honest, like I've been focused on sustaining democracy. And in my view, this vote is the most critical vote in my lifetime as it pertains to the broader issue of how democracy is going to work in this country. And while I agree that, like on the ballot, for example, there are a number of state house positions that were very important. There was only one school board for one of our young people lived in a ward where there's a school board election, and he's running unopposed. So as I've listened to parents, over the last year, particularly opening up a new school, parents are concerned about the same things that they've been concerned about for a long time, right? Is my child going to be safe? Is my child going to learn anything? How is my child going to be treated inside the school? Because as you all know, on every given day, something goes wrong in a school between a kid and a teacher and a whatever. And because of the way that our school is structured, it involves calls home to parents, like when kids are tardy, when kids do this and that. So from my standpoint, what I hear, just based on where I'm positioned, is just the normal concerns about what is happening to their children, not so much on the broader policy levels that I do think is critical, but that's not what I hear on a day-to-day basis, right? It's just more, how is my child treated in your school? Why do y'all have this rule? You got parents who come in every day who are mad, but not necessarily mad at us, but they're just mad. And so the issue, as you know, is how to get everybody settled down so that you can have a consequential conversation about what is it that we can do best for our children. So I'm not sure how helpful that is. But again, I think all of this is based on where we're all positioned on a day-to-day basis and what is our interface with parents. So I don't know how helpful that is.
It's very helpful. I mean, I just think over time, if you're like me and some of us who are in education, where every 4 years we wait with bated breath for presidential candidate to talk about education, right? We listen to all the State of the Unions, right? We're like, all right, they're going to talk about education tonight. And then we watch all the debates and we're going to ask them about education tonight. And it never happens. But to your point in our conversations, the topics that matter to parents aren't ones that are obscure, that sort of come out of nowhere, that they need more research on, and they need to do all this background on. It's whether they have the courage to talk about these issues in a way that addresses the core issues of how these things come about, but whether they have like solutions that are different than what we've been doing for the last 30, 40, 50 years. And in many cases, they don't. I want to come to you again, Jason. I mean, you mentioned, so you're a state senator in Georgia. You were chair of the school board in Atlanta and a school board member and a teacher. And so going from, a local official where as a school board member, like I said, I've been there, you kind of get into the minutia of a school district, and now you're a state policymaker. Is education still an important topic to people calling your office their state senate office? And are parents in particular in your district more or less engaged this cycle than normal?
Well, I think that parents are certainly engaged like they normally are, and they're gearing up to vote for what they see as a presidential election. Our local school board races are off cycle, so those won't be until next year. But education is certainly on their mind when they're speaking to state candidates and federal candidates, and Dr. Fuller is absolutely right. That there's this local component to it, and how each individual school is operated. But again, like I said earlier, the way they're supported is certainly top of mind for parents, and how the state can make schools safer, how the state can provide more mental health services. We had a school shooting in Georgia just a couple months ago, and you saw a sharp difference between different parties and how they would respond to that. And that's top of mind for a lot of parents because they fear that trauma can happen to their child, and that as parents they experience that trauma. So that is real. School choice is still top of mind and is still something that is a state issue that impacts local school districts. There's been a significant increase in discussions about vouchers here in Georgia, and the school choice discussion has turned into a voucher versus no voucher debate. And I think that there are several of us who are talking about some of the things that Gary talked about, which is how do you introduce into this discourse real options for the vast majority of Georgians, which means having more open enrollment options. How do you make sure that if there's a seat, if there's a seat available in a great school, that someone fill that seat versus being forced to stay in your home school and home district. So there's some innovative ways and solutions that we should be talking about that aren't addressed from a popular perspective at the presidential level, that are certainly addressed at the General Assembly and talked about at local school boards. So the other thing that I was going to mention and go back to, because it's top of mind for me, is the literacy crisis and the fact that so many of our kids can't read on time or cannot read on grade level, and that being a problem in Georgia. From a state perspective, we are very much a local control for the most part, unless the majority party disagrees with how local districts are doing it. There's this notion that each school district should be implementing and doing things how they believe fit. And that's a problem when it comes to literacy, because there's a science of reading. There's pretty clear evidence that what we've been doing for the last 3 decades is wrong and impacting kids in a negative way, and we should be changing it. And there's that disconnect between wanting local school districts to have autonomy, but at the same time ensuring that you have a high quality curriculum and highly trained teachers in every classroom when it comes to literacy being absolutely necessary for the success of our children. And how do you balance that in a state where autonomy is a priority for the state government? So anyways, I threw a lot out there, but those are the kinds of issues that there's some intersection with parents when we talk to them about education, whether it's an election year or not.
I want to pause there. Let me pause there 1 second, because I do want to show survey results. We did a survey when we first started to find out who's in the room and what percentage of those, and so we have about 33% of those in the room are educators. About half are advocates, people who are fighting for education, at least folks who are coming to this particular webinar as an advocate. Some of them could be parents as well, be policymakers as well. So we have educators in the room who are listening in, presumably they're parents as well, but also folks who are responding to and working with parents around advocating for their children in the school building, but also in rooms like IEP meetings and how schools are funded. And so thank you all for sharing that. But obviously this talk about literacy and that sort of getting at the foundation of education is clearly a hot topic, and other folks want to jump in. Before we do that, and I'll allow you to sort of answer that as you're answering the next question, Carrie, and let's get to sort of like how we use our voice, how are parents using their voice to talk about the things that Jason's talking about at a level, whether it be at the school level, at the school board level, at the federal level. And so, Carrie, like the National Parent Union is one of many organizations bringing parents together to advocate for their issue, but you all are one of the few operating at a national level. There are city-based groups like the Atlanta Thrive Oakland Reach, Memphis Lift, DC Pave, and they are working at the local level to advocate to the school board and in some cases state representatives for quality education. Talk a bit about how the pension is organized for those who don't understand sort of what you all do, but also why is it important, you think, for parents to come together and not simply respond to these things on a case-by-case basis or just posting to their Facebook page?
Yeah, I think that the examples that you gave of folks who are doing the work on the city level are beautiful examples of pockets of parent power. And so, frankly, we just announced a brand new partnership with the Oakland Reach yesterday around parents and tutoring and making sure that what they're doing in Oakland actually is brought to scale and brought to other communities across the country. But what we seek to do is identify those pockets of parent power across the country, because frankly, they've always existed. I'm going to say mothers, and I love dads too, so forgive me, but mamas have organized in communities, in neighborhoods, around schools, around their own neighborhoods, for generations. There are pockets of parent power absolutely everywhere. And we at the National Parents Union are some of the moms that have actually created those organizations on the local level. I'm from Massachusetts. I created a local organization. Tafshir Cosby is from Newark, New Jersey. She created Parent Impact. I mean, Bernita Bradley in Detroit. She created Brilliant Detroit. These pockets of parent power kind of exist in their own silos. So what we've done is we have an organizing team that goes out and organizes the mamas, those pockets of parent power. And so we've done almost 2,000 of those pockets in all 50 states, DC and Puerto Rico, representing about 1.7 million different members in all of those different areas. And we haven't said, we're here to take over. We're here to be a friend, and we want to connect folks, because oftentimes what we see is that we have these pockets, they don't know about each other. So you can have a state where, like for instance, in Detroit, just last month, we brought the Secretary of Education in to meet with 60 different parent advocacy groups in Southern Michigan. Half of them, like, they didn't even know the others exist. They work on similar issues. And when we bring them all together, this beautiful solidarity is built, and you can find how much commonality you have. And then together and collaboratively, you can really have enough mass to make the change, because that's what you need. You got to bring power together in all of these little pockets together. So for instance, we did a mobilization in Washington, D.C. Last April, where we brought 300 organizations from 47 different states in to go and have conversations on the federal level to talk about the issue that was the crisis that is facing communities across this nation, which is the literacy crisis. And the fact that, whether you are in Georgia, whether you are in Washington State, you're in Massachusetts, from sea to shining sea, this is a national crisis that deserves a federal response. So when you have 47 different states being represented, what we were able to do is go into all 435 offices and demand that they do something about it. And we had the something in our back pocket saying, we want you to actually form a bipartisan coalition and actually name this problem, name the fact that we are not using research-backed strategies, that we are not acknowledging that the science of reading actually exists. We want to get you to the table to pledge that you're going to do something about it. And so just at the beginning of September, we were able to get a bipartisan group. We're talking about Jack Reed from Rhode Island and Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, in a political climate where you can't even get folks to agree on the color of the sky. But with their leadership, they got 22 different United States senators, bipartisan from all different states, to co-sponsor it. And then it passed unanimously in the House. It's called Read to Rise. And it literally says that we are going to pledge in the next 5 years to get something done. And that $500 million that we allocate to literacy that goes down to the states, we're going to make sure that there are that is a hell of a lot more prescriptive and directive to make sure that this money is actually used on strategies that are research-backed, that are based in the science of reading, so that we can start to address this crisis. But the fact of the matter is, we weren't even acknowledging it. Between that, the Kids Online Safety Act, that is literally parents who are getting civically engaged, coming together and uniting, and not just having a hill day and putting on some t-shirts, but marching up there with a solution and demanding folks do something. And these are parents that are getting it done. So I'm convinced it's possible that we can still do big things for kids on the state and the federal level.
I mean, it is truly strength in numbers and organizing and be able to come in with an agenda and deliverables and accountability framework. I want to come to you, Dr. Fuller. You've been doing this work, for a while and have started organizations. What are ways organizations can show power and influence during an election? What are some of the advice you give organization leaders on really how to show their power?
Yeah, before I respond to that, Chris, I wanted to say something to Jason. I'm just curious about his thinking on it. So 14 years ago, the night of my mother's funeral, I convened a meeting because I was mad about the third grade reading scores for Black children in the city of Milwaukee. Those reading scores have not changed in 35 years. And the reason why they haven't changed is because the political structure writ large don't care about these children. And we need to quit acting like people care, because they don't care. Because if they cared, these numbers would not be there. And so I just responded to an article about why did No Child Left Behind not work? Why do reading initiatives not work? And what I said is they don't work because when they don't work, there's no, let's double down. Let's find out why it didn't work. Let's put more resources into it, et cetera, et cetera. We just say, oh, it didn't work. And the reason why that's so is because who these kids are that it is not working for. So the thing I want to ask Jason about, because this is not to me an either or strategy, but Jason, one of the things I'm sort of convinced about is that we're not going to find, even though we need it, a district strategy for dealing with the literacy problem for the kinds of issues that you just mentioned, because different districts got all these different things, right? So for me, the question is, how many freedom summers can we have around literacy that is organized from the base of our communities? You know what I mean? In other words, what I'm trying to get at, it seems to me one potential way to help a significant number of kids would be not to depend upon the formal structures that have all of the issues that you just raised, but it's turning this into the same type of thing we had to turn the voter registration into with things like the Mississippi Freedom Summer, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just asking, I'm just curious, how your generation like thinks about this, and I'm not saying we should not do all of the things you all are saying about getting bills passed and this and that, but I think what we don't have is we don't have this grassroots down deep in the community movement, for lack of a better term, around literacy. And I don't know how you all think about that.
What are your thoughts on that, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a significant amount of movement building that needs to happen around literacy. And Joe, I know you want to talk about numeracy as well. I used to have a school board colleague of mine who, at first he would come into meetings and say, look, reading, writing, arithmetic, that's what we should be focused on. And then everybody would kind of look at him and be like, what do you mean? There's all these other issues that we should be talking about. And then every meeting he would bring it back to reading, writing, arithmetic, reading, writing, arithmetic. And looking back on it now, I'm like, he was right. That's what we should be focused on. So much has gone on in our society that we have lost focus on, I think, what really matters. And some of these conversations do require having leaders who are focused, whether it's the governor, the state superintendent, folks who have the power of the purse in a particular state really bearing down and making sure that districts are focused on this. But at the same time, you got to have parents demanding accountability for their children being able to do those three things: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And if they can't do that, then it's a problem. And what I've been trying to do in Georgia, Dr. Fuller, is remind folks that yes, Black families, Latino families are primarily impacted by our literacy issue, but there are white kids in rural Georgia who have the same issue. And we need to make sure that the 60%, that we get that number down to 0%. And we got to do it quickly if we want to be able to fill the jobs that we all know we can't fill already. So I do think that there's a bottom up approach. The other thing that I think is going to be important for parent education, and for parents to just be aware of, is that it does take a mindset shift when we're talking about the literacy issue, to get away from all of these other extra things that we've come to expect out of our education system, including passing kids who don't necessarily meet the requirements for moving on to the next grade level. We need to have serious conversations about that, and special education and what that actually means, and making sure that we're tightening up around there. There's some conversations that we need to have with parents to make sure they're coming from a place of change as well, because as we all know on here, it's interesting. Parents push the change, but sometimes when the change impacts individual parents, they resist as well. So a lot of the conversations that we have here is going to require, Dr. Fuller, that grassroots movement, which is going to also need a lot of education.
Yeah. So, yeah, one last thing, Curtis, then I'm through. I want to respond though to you. One of the concerns that I have is the moment to exercise power right now is to get people out to vote. and what's happening is we got a lot of people on panels and shit, like they just high, but they I'm like, man, here's what I'm gonna do. While y'all on the panel, I'm gonna take actual people to the polls. Okay, because right now, that to me is the best way for people to exercise power. And every single vote in the state of Wisconsin counts, because Trump lost Wisconsin by 20,000 votes, and Biden won Wisconsin by 22,000 votes. So that says to me, Howard, you can't be out here talking. You got to find every person within your line of sight. And right now, the people who are in my immediate line of sight are the 22, 18-year-olds that we have in our building with my name on it. And both getting them registered, because and we've taken them through all the hoops, and getting them to vote. So the one thing I'm suggesting is that this is a moment where we all gotta like quit talking. And we gotta actually go get live bodies to vote. And that's really all I have to say.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And I think, and there's talk throughout the year, right? There's talk, I mean, in midterm elect, I mean, there's a lot of talk to your point, but in the end, to double down on action. I think young people, I think parents have always responded to action. And when I was on the school board, a lot of the talk and the chatter was always about what are you going to do, what has been done, but also with the evidence. Like this thing you're talking about, has it worked, and show improve. Carrie, I mean, what are you hearing, particularly from parents, but also about what you've heard so far?
Yeah, I just want to because Dr. Fuller's on, so we just need to say the thing and not dance around it, right? There's people don't actually care about outcomes for children, let alone Black children, when it comes to literacy. I have seen it firsthand when we have gone to states to try to pass literacy legislation, right. And you have people who will testify before the Joint Committee on Education talking about being an expert in reading, and you shouldn't be telling me how to teach kids how to read. I'm an expert. I have a master's degree. And we will get in there and we will say, really? Because if 2 out of 10 kids in your district are proficient in reading, that's not expertise. You need some help. You need some direct instruction to be told what to do, because clearly you need some help. But that's what we're up against, because you'll see, I'm going to name it, the unions will fight us because they don't want to be told what to do. And so that is, because it doesn't have anything to do with outcomes for kids and being horrified by the fact that our literacy rates are so low and we're in a crisis. It has to do with, how do grown-ups feel about being told that they have to change something that they're really comfortable doing? The other piece that I think is really important that Dr. Fuller said is I am sick to death of panels and talking. Like I'll do this with you, Curtis, you know, because I think this is the right conversation. But I don't do a lot of the convenings and panels and stuff anymore, because I got parents right now on the doors in Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona. And we've been at this for 2.5 months now, parents talking to parents. I'm literally getting in the minivan myself and I'm taking folks down. We're going to be in Allentown talking to Puerto Rican voters this weekend, right until election day. Every single person we can have a conversation with, because we can't do any of this stuff we want to do. And we're going to be in a hell of a lot more hot water if we end up with a Trump presidency.
No doubt.
I'm switch to my C4 side and say that right now, like this is going to be education. I'm sorry to say, will be the least of our worries in a Trump presidency.
So, Joe, thank you so much, Carrie. I think it's incredibly important that, you know, we challenge ourselves to vote, exercise your right, but also, you know, once you do that, to advocate to those officials who you vote.
Curtis, one more thing, since I am on this panel, and there's 41 people right now. I'm dropping the link in the chat. Don't just listen to me say it. Sign up right now. Meet me in Allentown. Meet us in Atlanta. First congressional district in Arizona. Get your butt out there. Don't regret 6 days from now that you didn't do it. Because if we don't do the work, it's our fault. It's our fault that this happens.
And you can make phone calls from home as well. I was an organizer in 2008. So many ways to get involved. Before I do come to you, Joe, we do have our second survey question. And this gets into what you do now, what you can do as a parent, as a citizen, and sort of what you've done before. The question is very simple. Have you ever called or emailed an elected official? Yes or no? And we'll actually, have you ever called or emailed an elected official to tell them about, you know, how you feel about an issue, or to comment, or to give them advice, or to respond to that? The question I have for you, Joe, is, you know, parents are saying, okay, Curtis, you all are telling me to vote and then get involved, but I've never talked to an official before. I've never actually attended a meeting. I've never even knocked on a door. But also people are going to be knocking on my door. I'm getting phone calls. I'm getting people coming to me. How can parents prepare to engage with those who are knocking on their door, asking for their vote, right? And then what information should these parents have as they're engaging with officials about what they care about and what these officials should be doing that are asking for their vote at the local and state level?
Well, I would say too, I just wanted to add, we have a huge math and numeracy crisis in this country that counts out all children, and any system that is unequal was set up by design. Nobody likes to hear that. None of this was an accident. And so how do you work against a system set up to create winners and losers? And I think that's what everybody on this panel is trying to, you know, erase that idea. But if I were acting in my local community and I was curious about schools, I would look at the graduation rates for my local school. That might be a good starting point. Not just the overall graduation rate, but for each cohort. I'd inquire about class size and whether or not teachers are offered high quality professional development, not just professional development, but truly high quality. I'd want to know what the district is doing to address pain point for kids. How are they dealing, for example, with the 9th grade, which can be a pivotal year in mathematics and otherwise for children? That's kind of where some kids really lose their enthusiasm for school. The curriculum gets harder and they can get kind of stuck and discouraged. What programs do they have? High quality programs targeting the poorest students. What is their effort to raise up the kids who are struggling the most or from the most disadvantaged families? What are the school's pre-K options? For older schools, how many students does each school counselor have? How big of a priority is that? Is the school tracking whether kids go on to college and whether they complete college? How are they handling multilingual learners? Do they create a welcoming environment for all students? Those are the questions that I would ask. And I would definitely argue that, of course, this is important for parents. But as I mentioned, I am not a parent, and I would devote my whole life to this issue because I care about the options the children in New York City, where I live, I care about the options that they have. It has a direct impact on our lives. The quality of our schools it dictates the quality of our communities. So there is literally no one alive on this planet right now who is not affected by the quality of education in their local public schools or the local schools, period.
Thank you so much. And those of you who didn't catch that, we're recording this. You could write those things down, and those questions you can be asking those who are calling you, asking for a vote, or knocking on your door. Jason, similarly, again, people are saying, particularly in a place like Georgia, a lot of folks that Carrie is sending, they're gonna be knocking on doors in these places. What type of conversation should these parents who are answering the phone, answering the door, have with those who are knocking on their door? What questions should they be asking? And what questions should those who are knocking on doors be prepared to answer in Georgia?
They should be talking about money and where the money is going, where those leaders are planning to invest, and in what. They should be asking questions about whose agenda these candidates are pushing. If they are spending more time talking about gender and the books that our kids are reading and not enough time on the fact that our kids can't read, then there should be significant questions there. I also think that they should be talking about school safety, because that again is top of mind. From the inner city all the way to rural Georgia, people are talking about being afraid for the safety of their children. And there should be significant questions about what that candidate is doing to ensure the safety of children. And if the candidate's response is arming teachers, then they should ask more questions. So I think that those are the issues that I would touch on. And then I would also ask those candidates how they expect to be held accountable, because not enough elected officials, whether it's from school board all the way up to governor, feel like that there's limited ways for them to be held accountable, and as a result, they don't feel like they have to do as much for children as they should.
And tell me, I do want to get to the accountability question, but I also wanted to see the results of our poll to see how many of us, how many folks who are listening in have actually emailed or called an elected official. 90% have done so. That's incredibly important, that they know what cares to you, what matters to you, what you care about, but that they can't just come around every 2 or 4 years and ask for your vote, and not do the thing they said they're going to do. In the time we have left, I do want to understand that, in your poll, Carrie, it did show that parents have differing views on how candidates from different parties will address education. And so just really briefly, in the time we have left, about 7 minutes, and I want everybody to sort of comment, how do you believe, Carrie, parents believe the two parties will address education, and what, particularly in the key areas, based on your poll?
Yeah, so what we can see, I mean, when we're talking about the top issues, protecting schools from violence, for instance, that 70% of parents who identify as being Republican identify that as a top issue. When it comes to who will actually address these issues and do so effectively, if we talk about overall confidence, Democrats right now have more confidence, amongst the American family electorate than Republicans. However, that margin is so much smaller than it used to be. American families used to trust Democrats over Republicans by double-digit margins historically. But I think this is a result of what we saw during the pandemic. I think that there is deep skepticism by both parties in terms of who actually can figure this out. Because the fact of the matter is, we seem to be, addicted to this antiquated system of public education, which has been the same for about 200 years with rare exceptions. And then when we do have folks that want to innovate, want to do something different, have a bold vision for how we can transform education using tactics like charter schools, they try to kill them. There's a campaign run to run them out of town. So these are the things that families want. They want to see that we're building and reimagining a public education system that prepares our kids for the jobs and the economy of the future. And what they are saying is that they have very little confidence that we're actually getting there, that we're doing that reimagining, that we're getting kids prepared, not even for the jobs of the future, but the jobs of today with the literacy and numeracy rates that we have right now. So I think what you're seeing is real overwhelm from the American electorate, given all of the different things that we have on our plates. And frankly, we need to do a better job of, as I said when we started this conversation, connecting education to the larger pain points like the economy. Because I can tell you as a parent, my deepest fear is that my kids will have the same path that I did. I have a GED from Boston Public Schools. I didn't go to college. I didn't have that experience. I want my kids to have better than I did. I think we all want that. And I don't want them to have to worry about paying the bills and any of that. But if we can make the case that the economic pain that we're all feeling as American families right now doesn't have to be that way for our kids, and the pathway to get them there is through access to a high quality education that prepares them for economic mobility and the jobs and the economy of the future, we might get somewhere, and by making the case to hopefully a President Harris that this ties directly into the opportunity agenda and what her vision is for a stronger middle class, we may get education back in the mix.
Dr. Fuller, thank you so much, Carrie. Dr. Fuller, why is it important to hold political parties, candidates accountable, no matter which one? I mean, again, we don't know who is going to be a president-elect in a week or so, but regardless of who that is, why is it important to hold them accountable?
Yeah, first of all, I'm going to try to be real brief. I've been hearing about holding people accountable for the last 60 years. So just forgive me if I'm a little bit cynical about what that even means. But here's what I would say. I'm an outlier on this, and I admit to it. I've had the opportunity over the last 2 or 3 weeks to address parents, grandparents in numbers, right? And what I've been saying is this election ain't about no issues. This election is about Donald Trump, who wants to be a dictator. And so what because I ain't got no time to talk about how you feel about education and transgender. I'm trying to tell you, you're about to elect a man who hates you, who hates Black people, who hates brown people. And we got to elect Kamala Harris, and then we can fight about the education issues. But if Trump is elected, the type of fight that we're going to have, with all due respect, it ain't going to be about education. It's going to be about survival. It's going to be about sustaining victories that have been hard fought for years and years and years. Because when you read that Project 2025, as I have read, they are clear, man, on what making America great means. It means turning back victories that have taken decades. Women's productive rights. Just go through the whole list. So what I'm saying at this moment in time, with all due respect, education ain't something that is at the forefront of what we're facing. But that whether Trump gets elected or Harris, we're gonna have to fight. But it's gonna be a totally different type of fight. Is the way I'm looking at it. And so what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to get people to the polls, and I'm trying to get them to vote against Trump. Period. and I'm trying to paint a picture of who this man is for people who seem to be unclear. The last thing I would say is I also had the opportunity to do a voter seminar with our 18-year-olds. There were 5 of them when I started out the seminar who said, I ain't gonna vote because I'm young and it don't matter. And what I said to him is, do y'all like me? Yeah, we like you, Doc. I'm on Social Security. Your grandparents on Social Security. This fool get in, he gonna cut Social Security. By the time I got through, I had nobody in that room who said they ain't voting. Period. So I don't know. That's just where I'm at.
No,
This is a special moment in history, man.
No, Doc, I mean, the stakes are high. I think I want everyone to understand that on this call. Parents understand that the stakes are so high for this election that, you know, I'm glad that you're passionate for this. All of us who are in this work, fighting for children and for systems that, you know, to Joe's point, have literally been set up to destroy us, and yet we persist. I'm sorry, we are out of time, but for good reason, because we had such an amazing and engaging conversation with amazing folks who are working at the state, local, and federal level to ensure that our students, our families, our parents have voice and have the right to operate like everyone else takes for granted in this country. And so many people of color struggle to fight for and get. And this election, I think, is going to have a tremendous effect on what that looks like. I want to thank you so much, Kerry Rodriguez, Joe Napolitano, Jason Estevez, Senator Estevez, and Dr. Fuller for joining us today. Thank you, everybody, for tapping in with us on this episode of our ROS webinar. Again, enough talk, reality, fight. It matters so much to our kids and to our families. Thank you all so much. Looking forward to you as joining.